There is a quiet danger that lives within many people, a danger that does not shout, does not announce itself, and yet slowly shapes the course of a life. It is the suppression of emotion. Most individuals do not recognize it as harmful. In fact, many are taught from an early age that controlling emotions is a sign of strength, maturity, and discipline. Don't cry. Stay strong. Ignore it and move on. These messages become internalized, forming the foundation of how we relate to our inner world. But what is rarely understood is this: what is suppressed does not disappear, it transforms. An emotion that is not expressed, processed, or acknowledged does not simply vanish. Instead, it sinks into the unconscious, where it continues to live, influencing thoughts, behavior, and perception in ways that are often invisible to conscious awareness. This is where the true danger begins. Suppressed emotions do not die, they accumulate, distort, and eventually demand expression, often in destructive forms. Consider anger, for example. A person who believes anger is unacceptable may learn to suppress it entirely. On the surface, they may appear calm, composed, even agreeable. But beneath that surface, the energy of anger remains active. It may manifest as passive-aggressive behavior, chronic irritability, or sudden outbursts that seem disproportionate to the situation. In some cases, it turns inward, becoming self-criticism, guilt, or even depression. The individual may not recognize the connection, yet the root remains the same: an emotion that was never allowed to exist consciously. The same is true for sadness. When grief is suppressed, it does not resolve itself. It lingers, shaping the emotional landscape of a person's life. They may feel numb, disconnected, or unable to experience joy fully. Relationships become shallow, not because the individual lacks depth, but because they have learned to avoid the very emotions that create genuine human connection. Fear, too, when unacknowledged, becomes a silent architect of behavior. It limits decisions, constrains possibilities, and creates patterns of avoidance that gradually shrink one's life. A person may believe they are simply being practical or realistic, yet beneath that reasoning lies an unexamined fear guiding their choices. What makes suppressed emotions particularly dangerous is their invisibility. Because they operate beneath conscious awareness, individuals often attribute their struggles to external circumstances rather than internal dynamics. They may blame other people, situations, or even themselves, without realizing that the true source of their distress lies within. This is where the concept of the unconscious becomes essential. The human psyche is not limited to what we are aware of. Beneath the surface lies a vast realm of thoughts, feelings, and memories that shape our experience of reality. When emotions are suppressed, they are pushed into this realm, where they continue to exert influence without being directly observed. Over time, this creates a division within the self. On one side is the conscious identity, the person one believes oneself to be. On the other is the hidden emotional reality, containing all that has been rejected, denied, or ignored. This division leads to inner conflict, tension, and a sense of fragmentation. People often describe this as feeling not like themselves, or being unable to understand their own reactions. The consequences extend beyond the psychological. The body, too, is affected. Emotions are not purely mental phenomena, they are physiological experiences. When they are suppressed, the body must carry the burden. Chronic stress, tension, fatigue, and even illness can arise as the body attempts to manage what the mind refuses to acknowledge. The phrase "the body keeps the score" reflects a profound truth. What is not processed emotionally is often expressed physically. Relationships also suffer. Suppressed emotions create barriers to authenticity and vulnerability. When a person is disconnected from their own emotional experience, they struggle to connect with others on a meaningful level. Communication becomes indirect, needs go unexpressed, and misunderstandings multiply. Over time, this leads to isolation, even in the presence of others. Perhaps the most subtle yet profound consequence is the loss of vitality. Emotions are not merely obstacles to be controlled, they are sources of energy, creativity, and meaning. Joy, passion, curiosity, and love all rise from the same emotional system that produces anger, sadness, and fear. When we suppress one part, we inevitably dull the whole. Life becomes less vivid, less engaging, less alive. It is important to understand that suppression is often a learned response. It develops as a way to cope with environments where certain emotions were not safe to express. A child who is punished for anger learns to hide it. A person who is shamed for vulnerability learns to conceal it. In this sense, suppression is not a flaw, it is an adaptation. But what once served as protection can become a limitation in adulthood. The challenge, then, is not to eliminate emotions, but to change our relationship with them. This begins with awareness. Recognizing that suppressed emotions exist is the first step toward understanding their impact. It requires honesty, reflection, and a willingness to look inward without judgment. From this awareness comes the possibility of integration. Instead of rejecting certain emotions, we begin to acknowledge them as part of the human experience. Anger becomes a signal rather than a threat. Sadness becomes a process rather than a weakness. Fear becomes information rather than a limitation. In this way, emotions regain their proper role not as enemies to be suppressed, but as guides to be understood. In the blocks that follow, we will explore how suppressed emotions shape behavior, how they manifest in everyday life, and most importantly, how they can be recognized, processed, and integrated. Because the truth is simple, yet often overlooked. The more we avoid our emotions, the more they control us. And the moment we begin to face them, we begin to reclaim our lives. One of the most deceptive aspects of suppressed emotions is that they do not appear as emotions at all. They disguise themselves as thoughts, habits, preferences, and even personality traits. A person rarely says, "I am acting this way because I have unprocessed anger or fear." Instead, they say, "This is just who I am." And in that belief lies the subtle power of suppression. It convinces you that what is conditioned is natural, and what is hidden does not exist. But the truth is far more complex. Suppressed emotions do not remain passive. They shape behavior continuously, influencing decisions, reactions, and patterns in ways that often go unnoticed. They operate beneath the surface, quietly directing actions, while remaining outside conscious awareness. Consider the person who avoids confrontation at all costs. On the surface, this may appear as kindness, patience, or emotional maturity, but often, beneath this behavior lies suppressed anger or fear of conflict. The individual is not choosing peace, they are avoiding discomfort. As a result, they may tolerate situations that violate their boundaries, leading to resentment that builds silently over time. Eventually, this resentment may erupt unexpectedly, damaging relationships and reinforcing the belief that emotions are dangerous. Another example is the pursuit of constant achievement. Many individuals drive themselves relentlessly, setting goals, chasing success, and pushing beyond their limits. Society often rewards this behavior, labeling it ambition or discipline. Yet, in many cases, it is fueled by suppressed emotions, feelings of inadequacy, fear of failure, or a deep need for validation. The person may not feel satisfied even after achieving their goals, because the underlying emotional need remains unresolved. The behavior continues, not out of genuine desire, but out of unconscious compulsion. Suppressed fear, in particular, has a profound impact on behavior. It often manifests as avoidance. A person may procrastinate, hesitate, or rationalize their inaction, believing they are simply being cautious or waiting for the right time. In reality, they are being guided by an unacknowledged fear of failure, rejection, or uncertainty. This fear shapes decisions silently, limiting opportunities and reinforcing a cycle of inaction. What makes this dynamic especially powerful is that it creates patterns. Behavior influenced by suppressed emotions tends to repeat itself. A person may find themselves in similar relationships, facing similar conflicts, or encountering the same obstacles over and over again. They may feel as though life is repeating itself, as if they are stuck in a loop. In truth, the pattern originates within. The suppressed emotion acts as a template, shaping perception and response in a consistent way. Relationships are one of the clearest arenas where suppressed emotions reveal themselves. People often attract or create situations that mirror their inner world. Someone who suppresses feelings of unworthiness may repeatedly find themselves in relationships where they feel undervalued. Someone who avoids vulnerability may struggle to form deep connections, even if they desire them. These patterns are not coincidences, they are expressions of unresolved emotional dynamics. Communication is also deeply affected. When emotions are suppressed, they do not disappear, they become indirect. Instead of expressing needs or feelings clearly, individuals may rely on hints, assumptions, or passive behavior. This leads to misunderstandings, frustration, and emotional distance. The inability to communicate authentically is not a lack of skill, but a consequence of being disconnected from one's own emotional experience. Another significant effect is the distortion of perception. Suppressed emotions influence how we interpret the world. A person carrying an acknowledged anger may perceive others as hostile or unfair. Someone with suppressed insecurity may interpret neutral situations as criticism or rejection. These interpretations feel real, yet they are colored by internal emotional states. In this way, suppressed emotions do not just influence behavior, they shape reality itself. The body also plays a crucial role in this process. Emotions are not abstract, they are experienced physically. When they are suppressed, the body holds the tension. This can manifest as chronic stress, restlessness, fatigue, or even physical pain. A person may feel constantly on edge without understanding why. The body becomes a container for what the mind refuses to process. Over time, this creates a sense of disconnection. Individuals may feel out of alignment with themselves, as though something is missing or unresolved. They may struggle to identify their true desires, make decisions, or feel fully present in their lives. This disconnection is not random, it is the result of suppressing the very signals that guide authentic experience. It is important to recognize that these behaviors are not flaws. They are adaptations. At some point, suppressing certain emotions served a purpose. It may have protected an individual from conflict, rejection, or emotional pain. But what once provided safety can later become limitation. The patterns persist even when they are no longer necessary, shaping behavior in ways that restrict growth and fulfillment. Awareness is the first step toward change. By observing patterns without judgment, one can begin to identify the influence of suppressed emotions. Questions, such as "why do I react this way?" or "what am I avoiding?" can reveal underlying dynamics. This process requires honesty and patience, as the answers are not always immediately clear. As awareness deepens, the connection between emotion and behavior becomes more visible. One begins to see that reactions are not random, that patterns have roots, and that those roots lie in the emotional experiences that have been ignored or denied. This realization is both challenging and liberating. It challenges the belief that behavior is fixed, and it offers the possibility of transformation. True change does not come from forcing behavior to shift, but from addressing the underlying emotional cause. When suppressed emotions are acknowledged, processed, and integrated, behavior naturally evolves. The need for avoidance diminishes, communication becomes more direct, and decisions align more closely with authentic desire. In this way, reclaiming suppressed emotions is not about becoming more emotional, it is about becoming more conscious. It is about bringing into awareness what has been hidden, and in doing so, regaining control over one's actions and life direction. In the next block, we will explore how suppressed emotions manifest in the body and mind, revealing the deeper connection between emotional repression and physical, as well as psychological well-being. I have long observed that the human psyche is like an intricate ecosystem, in which every feeling, thought, and instinct has its proper place and function. When a person suppresses emotions, they do not disappear, rather, they retreat into the shadow. a dark and often unrecognized part of the self. Over time, these buried emotions begin to influence our lives in ways we rarely understand. And yet their impact is profound and inevitable. When I speak of suppressed emotions, I do not refer merely to occasional discomfort or fleeting sadness. I mean the habitual repression of anger, fear, grief, and even joy, the refusal to allow oneself to fully experience the spectrum of human feeling. This repression is not a benign act. It is akin to damming a river. At first, the water may be contained, appearing calm on the surface, but beneath, the current grows restless, and the pressure builds. So too with emotions. They accumulate in the unconscious, and the longer they are denied, the more destructive their influence becomes. Physically, the consequences of repression manifest in unmistakable ways. I have witnessed countless patients whose unexpressed anger or grief is mirrored in their bodies. High blood pressure, chronic fatigue, autoimmune disorders. These are not mere coincidences. The body, like the psyche, cannot indefinitely harbor what must flow. Stress hormones, particularly cortisol, rise when emotions are suppressed, subtly undermining health over the years. The mind may convince itself that it is strong and disciplined, but the body, in its wisdom, reveals the truth that we often refuse to see. Psychologically, the effects are even more insidious. I have observed individuals who, for decades, refuse to acknowledge their inner turmoil. They present a facade of calm and control, yet beneath this veneer lies a restless chaos. Anxiety and depression often emerge, not as sudden tragedies, but as the natural result of prolonged suppression. The soul becomes constricted, unable to experience joy freely. Creativity, that most essential force of life, is stifled. When a person refuses to feel fully, the wellspring of imagination, passion, and insight diminishes. The individual becomes increasingly disconnected from the self, a stranger in their own psyche. Relationships are particularly vulnerable to the effects of suppressed emotion. One might imagine that by withholding anger, fear, or sadness, one is protecting others from harm. But in reality, the opposite occurs. Emotions that are not expressed find indirect outlets. Anger may emerge as passive aggressiveness, resentment, or sudden, disproportionate outbursts. Sadness may transform into withdrawal, coldness, or avoidance. Love, when mingled with fear or shame, becomes complicated, constricted, or conditional. Those who suppress their feelings often wonder why intimacy eludes them, why communication falters, or why conflict escalates. The answer, always, lies within the unacknowledged emotions of the heart. Furthermore, suppressed emotions exact a subtle, yet relentless toll on personal efficacy and life purpose. When the psyche is burdened with unprocessed feelings, decision-making becomes impaired. One may find oneself trapped in indecision, procrastination, or self-sabotage. The energy required to maintain the repression is considerable. It diverts attention and focus from meaningful pursuits. The inner conflict consumes psychic resources, leaving less for creativity, growth, and self-realization. In essence, the person becomes a prisoner of their own unexpressed feelings, unable to act fully or authentically in the world. The danger of suppression lies not merely in the accumulation of small troubles, but in the inevitability of eventual eruption. Buried emotions, like seeds left in the dark, grow in unpredictable and often violent ways. What begins as a minor irritability may, under the right circumstances, explode into rage. Anxiety may intensify into panic, grief into despair. The carefully maintained mask of control can shatter abruptly, leaving the individual bewildered by the intensity of feelings they have long denied. I have always contended that it is far better to confront emotions as they arise than to allow them to fester and accumulate in the unconscious, for the consequences of sudden eruption are rarely contained. Moreover, suppression distorts the very structure of the self. The conscious mind, which must navigate reality, becomes increasingly disconnected from the unconscious, which harbors the suppressed emotions. This disconnection breeds inner fragmentation, The persona, the outward mask we present to the world, may appear polished, competent, and serene, while the shadow, the hidden, repressed aspects, grows ever more restless. Over time, this imbalance may lead to confusion, despair, and a sense of alienation from one's own life. One may pursue achievements, relationships, and pleasures, yet feel an inexplicable emptiness. This is the voice of the suppressed emotions, calling from the depths, reminding us that a life not fully felt is a life only partially lived. I have always maintained that emotional repression is not merely a psychological issue. It is a spiritual concern. Emotions are the language of the soul, and when they are ignored, the soul suffers. We may attempt to cultivate rationality, discipline, or moral virtue at the expense of feeling, but in doing so, we sacrifice essential parts of our humanity. The path to wholeness, the individuation process, I have long described, requires the acknowledgement and integration of all aspects of the self, including the shadow. Suppressed emotions resist integration. They demand recognition, expression, and, ultimately, transformation. Without this work, one cannot truly know oneself, nor can one live fully or authentically. It is also important to recognize the social dimension of suppressed emotions. When emotions are denied within the individual, they often manifest indirectly in society. Societal repression of grief, fear, or anger through norms, taboos, or expectations creates collective shadows, which may erupt as conflict, aggression, or systemic dysfunction. Thus, the consequences of repression are not limited to the individual, they ripple outward, shaping families, communities, and cultures. By learning to acknowledge and express our emotions responsibly, we not only preserve our health and sanity, but also contribute to a more harmonious and conscious society. In conclusion, I have come to see that suppressed emotions are not harmless. They are forces that, when unacknowledged, exert pressure on the body, psyche, relationships, and spirit. They distort perception, stifle creativity, and impede growth. They can erupt in destructive ways, leaving devastation in their wake. Yet there is hope. By confronting our emotions, naming them, and allowing ourselves to feel deeply and fully, we reclaim the lost energies of the psyche. We restore vitality, creativity, and authenticity. We transform the shadow into a source of insight and strength. And in doing so, we step closer to the true purpose of life. To know oneself, to integrate all aspects of the soul, and to live fully, without fear of the depths within. Suppressing emotions, I have learned, is not discipline, it is a subtle form of self-imprisonment. Freedom comes not from avoidance, but from courageous engagement with the full spectrum of feeling. Only then can one experience the richness, the tragedy, and the beauty of life in its totality. Having described the profound consequences of suppressed emotions, I now turn to the question that inevitably arises. How does one face these hidden currents of the psyche? How does a person reclaim the energy, clarity, and wholeness that have been lost to repression? The answer is neither simple nor instantaneous, but it is attainable through conscious engagement, self-reflection, and disciplined practice. I speak here not as one offering abstract theory, but from years of observing the human soul in both my patients and myself. The first step is recognition. One must acknowledge that emotions exist, even when they have been long denied. This recognition requires honesty, for the psyche often resists revelation. Anger may appear as irritability, fear as restlessness, and grief as exhaustion. These are the shadows of what has been buried. I encourage my students and patients to listen carefully to the body, for it speaks truths the mind may avoid. Tension in the shoulders, tightness in the chest, a knot in the stomach, these are messages from repressed feelings. By attending to these signals, one begins the process of uncovering what has been hidden. Once recognition occurs, the next step is naming. To give an emotion its proper name is to give it existence and legitimacy. Anger must be called anger, sadness called sadness, fear called fear. Euphemisms or rationalizations only serve to perpetuate repression. I have often said that naming is the first act of liberation. It transforms an amorphous, threatening shadow into a conscious object that can be observed, understood, and eventually integrated. It is through this process that the psyche begins to regain equilibrium. Following recognition and naming, one must allow oneself to feel. This step is deceptively simple yet profoundly challenging. Many resist, fearing that surrendering to emotion will lead to chaos. But suppression has already created far greater chaos in the unconscious. To feel fully is not to be consumed by emotion, it is to experience it consciously, without judgment or avoidance. One may cry, rage, tremble, or simply sit with discomfort. By permitting the emotion its space, the individual allows the shadow to emerge from darkness into consciousness, where it may be understood and transformed. Reflection is the next vital step. One must seek to understand the origin, triggers, and patterns of suppressed emotions. Journaling, contemplation, or dialogue with a trusted confidant can illuminate the underlying causes of feelings that have long remained unconscious. I have found that patients who engage in reflective practice gain insight into recurring patterns, why certain situations provoke intense anger, why some relationships trigger inexplicable fear, why guilt or shame lingers beyond reason. Insight alone does not eliminate the emotion, but it empowers the individual to respond consciously, rather than react unconsciously. Integration is the culmination of this process. Integration does not mean eradicating emotions, nor does it mean acting on every impulse without restraint. Rather, it is the conscious acknowledgement and harmonization of all aspects of the psyche, the persona, the ego, and the shadow. When suppressed emotions are integrated, their energy becomes available for constructive use. Anger may be transformed into assertiveness, grief into compassion, fear into discernment, joy into creative inspiration. Integration restores the balance of the self and fosters a sense of authenticity and vitality that repression had obscured. I must emphasize that this process is gradual and often cyclical. One does not confront the entirety of suppressed emotion in a single effort. There are setbacks, resistance, and moments of profound discomfort. Yet each encounter with the shadow strengthens the psyche and brings one closer to wholeness. I have observed that those who persist in facing their emotions with courage experience a liberation that is both tangible and subtle, an ease of body, a clarity of mind, and a deepened capacity for empathy and connection with others. Community and ritual can also support the integration of suppressed emotions. Sharing experiences with others, participating in creative expression, or engaging in spiritual practice can provide safe channels for emotional release and understanding. Human beings are inherently social, and the act of acknowledging feelings in a supportive context magnifies their transformative potential. Art, music, storytelling, and meditation are all vehicles through which the psyche may express and process what words alone cannot convey. I would also caution against methods that merely distract from emotions, such as compulsive work, substance use, or avoidance through over-intellectualization. These strategies may provide temporary relief but ultimately reinforce suppression. The path to health requires engagement rather than escape. It demands the courage to witness one's own suffering, to stand in the face of inner turmoil, and to participate actively in the alchemy of the soul. Finally, the conscious integration of suppressed emotions fosters what I have long called individuation, the unfolding of the self toward wholeness and authenticity. It is through this process that one attains a deeper understanding of life, relationships, and the mysterious interplay of conscious and unconscious forces. Suppressed emotions, once faced and transformed, become not obstacles but guides. They illuminate the depths of the psyche, revealing the interconnectedness of body, mind, and spirit. They provide insight, creativity, and a richer appreciation for the totality of existence. In my own life, I have repeatedly confronted emotions I once feared: anger, grief, despair, and in doing so, I have discovered reservoirs of strength, wisdom, and clarity I could not have imagined. The process is not painless, but it is profoundly liberating. I encourage all who wish to live fully to undertake this journey, to recognize, name, feel, reflect, and integrate. It is the work of a lifetime, but it is the path to vitality, authenticity, and the true richness of human experience. In conclusion, confronting suppressed emotions is not merely therapeutic, it is existential. To deny them is to deny a part of oneself, to live in partial darkness. To face them is to step into the light of consciousness, to reclaim the energy and wholeness that have been lost. I have observed countless souls who, through the courage to feel, have transformed not only their own lives but the lives of those around them. The shadow, once feared, becomes a teacher. The emotions once suppressed, once recognized and integrated, become allies in the sacred task of living fully, and thus, the human spirit, though frail and imperfect, moves closer to its profound potential, to know itself and to embrace the fullness of life without fear. Having described both the consequences of suppressed emotions and the theoretical path toward their integration, I now turn to the practical methods by which one may begin this transformative work. Theory alone is insufficient. The human psyche requires action, ritual, and disciplined engagement. Suppressed emotions, after years of denial, demand a deliberate, tangible response if they are to be acknowledged, felt, and integrated. The first and most fundamental exercise is self-observation. I encourage my students and patients to cultivate a daily practice of noticing their emotional state. This is not merely identifying moods superficially, it is observing subtle undercurrents in the body and mind. Ask yourself, what am I feeling right now? Where do I feel it in my body? What thoughts accompany this sensation? Keep a journal and write without censorship. Even brief notes like chest, irritation rising, anxious thoughts about work begin to map the landscape of your unconscious. Through repeated observation, patterns emerge, revealing the emotions that have long been suppressed. Next, I recommend emotional articulation. Naming emotions is powerful, but expression completes the act of acknowledgement. Speak aloud to yourself or to a trusted confidant. I feel anger at my colleague because I feel undervalued. Allow your voice to carry the emotion. If anger wells up, let it express itself safely. Pound a pillow, stomp your feet, or release tension through controlled vocalization. If grief arises, permit tears. Fear may manifest as trembling. These expressions are not signs of weakness, they are the psyche's natural means of releasing accumulated pressure. To suppress these impulses is to prolong suffering. To allow them, in a conscious and contained manner, is to reclaim personal energy. I also emphasize active imagination, a technique I have long advocated as a bridge between the conscious and unconscious mind. In a quiet space, close your eyes and invite the suppressed emotion to take form in your imagination. Ask it to appear as a figure, image, or symbol. Observe without judgment. Engage in dialogue with this inner figure. Ask what it desires, why it has remained hidden, and what message it carries. This method allows the shadow to reveal itself in a safe and symbolic context. Over time, repeated sessions of active imagination facilitate the integration of previously denied emotional material, transforming fear into understanding and anger into clarity. Another valuable exercise is creative expression. Painting, writing, sculpting, or music provides avenues through which emotions can manifest in nonverbal form. I have witnessed patients who, unable to articulate grief or resentment, release it through the act of creation. The product, whether it is a painting, poem, or song, serves as a mirror of the inner state, revealing nuances and depths otherwise inaccessible. Creativity is, in essence, a dialogue with the unconscious, a means of translating suppressed emotions into conscious knowledge. Movement and body-based practices are equally essential. The body remembers what the mind represses. Techniques such as yoga, tai chi, dance, or even simple stretching and breathwork allow the body to release tension stored by unprocessed emotions. A clenching jaw or tight shoulders often accompanies anger or fear. Through intentional movement and breath, these energies may be discharged safely, restoring balance between body and psyche. I encourage patients to experiment with rhythmic, repetitive motion, which can be particularly effective in accessing and releasing buried feelings. I must also stress the importance of ritual and symbolic acts. The human psyche responds to symbolism and ceremony, which provide a structured context for emotional release. Light a candle, write a letter to an absent or deceased figure, or create a small symbolic act of letting go. These rituals anchor the emotional work, giving it form and meaning. By engaging both imagination and ritual, suppressed emotions find a pathway to consciousness that is respectful, contained, and transformative. Another crucial practice is reflective dialogue. Speak with someone trained in psychological guidance or with whom you feel safe to explore difficult emotions. The mere act of articulating a suppressed feeling to another human being validates it and reduces its unconscious power. In therapy or guided conversations, one may also receive feedback, insights, and techniques for further integration. Social support, when combined with conscious emotional engagement, dramatically accelerates the process of liberation. Equally, I recommend dream analysis. Dreams are the natural language of the unconscious. Suppressed emotions often emerge in symbolic form during sleep, offering guidance and illumination. Keep a dream journal, noting recurring themes, symbols, and emotional tones. Reflect upon these images and consider how they connect to your waking life and emotional patterns. Dreams may reveal fears, desires, and unresolved conflicts that have been long denied. Engaging with these nocturnal messages deepens self-knowledge and enhances the integration of emotions. It is also important to practice gradual exposure to emotional triggers. Avoidance perpetuates suppression. If certain situations provoke fear, anger, or sadness, approach them slowly and mindfully. Note the arising emotions, allow them to manifest, and observe their course without judgment. Over time, repeated exposure diminishes the intensity of the reaction and strengthens emotional resilience. This is the art of living consciously, to face what is uncomfortable, rather than to evade it. Finally, I encourage integration through reflection and meaning-making. Once emotions have been recognized, expressed, and explored, consider the lessons they offer. Anger may reveal neglected boundaries, grief may illuminate love lost, or unacknowledged fear may point toward areas of growth. Integration is not suppression reversed, it is the transformation of raw emotional energy into conscious wisdom. Through this process, the psyche attains balance, and the individual moves closer to wholeness, the true aim of human existence. In conclusion, the practical work of confronting suppressed emotions is both demanding and rewarding. It requires self-observation, articulation, active imagination, creative expression, bodily engagement, ritual, dialogue, dream work, and gradual exposure. Each method addresses different dimensions of the psyche, ensuring that repressed feelings are brought into conscious awareness, expressed safely, and integrated meaningfully. I have witnessed this work restore vitality, clarity, and authenticity in countless individuals. Those who undertake it courageously emerge not merely healed, but transformed, possessing an expanded capacity for empathy, creativity, and self-knowledge. The path is not easy, but it is the only way to liberate the soul from the weight of the unacknowledged. To live fully, one must meet the emotions one has long denied. The shadow, once feared, becomes a guide. Suppressed energy, once blocked, becomes vitality, and the individual, once fragmented, steps toward the profound wholeness that is the ultimate aim of life itself. After guiding the reader through the labyrinth of suppressed emotions, their consequences, and the practical methods for confronting and integrating them, I wish now to draw the threads together and reflect upon what it means to live with emotional wholeness. For, ultimately, the work of the psyche is not simply to endure or manage life's challenges, but to cultivate a consciousness that is fully awake, aware, and capable of embracing all dimensions of human experience. I have observed, throughout my career, that suppressed emotions act as silent architects of human suffering. They shape our bodies, distort our thoughts, and obscure the truth of who we are. Yet these very emotions, once faced, become powerful guides. They teach us the rhythms of the soul, the limits of denial, and the depth of our own resilience. The process is alchemical. What is buried transforms into insight, creativity, and vitality. To avoid this work is to remain partial in existence. To undertake it is to move toward the totality of being. Living in emotional wholeness requires courage. The psyche resists confrontation because it fears the intensity of feeling, the vulnerability of exposure, and the unknown depths of the unconscious. But I have learned, from both my personal experience and my work with countless individuals, that avoidance is far costlier than engagement. Suppressed anger may eventually erupt as disproportionate rage, denied grief may fester. As despair, repressed fear may manifest as chronic anxiety or compulsive avoidance. The cost is not merely psychological, it is physical, relational, and spiritual. By contrast, the courage to face, name, and integrate these emotions restores energy, clarity, and a profound sense of authenticity. Integration is not instantaneous. It is an ongoing, iterative process. Each day presents new emotions, new triggers, and new opportunities for growth. The psyche, like a living organism, evolves gradually, requiring patience and repeated effort, self-observation, creative expression, active imagination, ritual, and dialogue. These are not one-time interventions, but lifelong practices. Over time, they cultivate an inner environment where emotions are neither suppressed nor chaotic, but recognized, valued, and harmonized within the totality of the self. One of the most transformative realizations is that suppressed emotions often carry wisdom. Anger reveals boundaries that have been ignored, fear points to areas where courage is required, grief illuminates love and attachment that we may have undervalued. By engaging with these emotions, we gain insight not only into ourselves, but also into the nature of human life. Emotional wholeness is, therefore, inseparable from self-knowledge. To integrate the shadow is to understand one's own depths, limitations, and capacities, a prerequisite for genuine freedom and creativity. The social dimension of emotional integration must not be neglected. Human beings are inherently relational, and suppressed emotions rarely remain private. They manifest in subtle, often destructive, ways. Passive aggressiveness, withdrawal, overcompensation, or conflict. By confronting and processing emotions consciously, we improve not only our inner lives but also our interactions with others. Empathy, understanding, and authentic connection arise naturally when one has faced one's own emotional landscape. The liberation of self becomes a gift to the collective, a quiet but profound contribution to a more conscious and compassionate society. I must also address the spiritual aspect of this journey. Suppressed emotions are not mere inconveniences or obstacles, they are signals from the soul. They point to what is neglected, denied, or misunderstood. Engaging with them is, in effect, an act of spiritual awakening. It aligns consciousness with the deeper currents of the psyche, fostering harmony between the ego and the unconscious. In this way, emotional wholeness transcends mere psychological health. It becomes a pathway to wisdom, purpose, and a life lived fully in the service of both self and spirit. To embrace emotional wholeness is to embrace life itself. It requires honesty, courage, and the willingness to confront discomfort. It demands that one set aside the illusion of perfection, control, or invulnerability, recognizing that vulnerability is not weakness, but the conduit of authentic existence. By confronting suppressed emotions, one liberates the energy that has been trapped, transforms suffering into insight, and opens the door to creativity, vitality, and love. Life becomes not a series of mechanical routines or superficial achievements, but a dynamic interplay of feeling, thought, and meaning. In my observations, the human psyche possesses an innate capacity for healing and transformation. Suppressed emotions, though dangerous if ignored, carry the potential for profound growth when consciously engaged. Anger can become discernment, fear, wisdom, grief, compassion, joy, inspiration. Each emotion, once faced, teaches a unique lesson and contributes to the formation of a balanced, integrated self. The individual who undertakes this work becomes not merely functional, but whole, capable of meeting life's challenges with authenticity, resilience, and depth. In conclusion, the journey toward emotional wholeness is the central task of a conscious life. Suppressed emotions, if ignored, destroy health, distort relationships, and obscure the self. Yet if faced with courage and guidance, they become allies, teachers, and sources of profound insight. Recognition, naming, feeling, reflection, and integration are not optional. They are the pathway to vitality, authenticity, and spiritual alignment. To embrace this path is to embrace life in its fullest sense, to transform shadow into light, and to participate fully in the unfolding of one's own humanity. Thus, I leave the reader with this imperative. Do not fear the emotions you have long denied. Meet them openly, explore them with curiosity, and allow them to illuminate the depths of your being. In doing so, you will discover that the very forces once feared are the keys to your liberation, creativity, and wholeness. The journey is not easy, yet it is the only journey worth undertaking, the path to knowing oneself, embracing life, and living in profound emotional freedom.